again. I'm back today to show you guys how to make my variation of almond butter cups and turning them into fat bombs so that they're more keto friendly. Making almond butter cups is a pretty simple process, and at the end of the video I'll explain what the macro difference is between traditional almond butter cups and the keto version that I am going to show you right now. So let's get started. The first step to making almond butter cups is to make the almond butter filling so that then you can let it chill. So that's what we're going to do. So for this almond butter filling, it's just going to be a half a cup, it's going to be a half a cup of almond butter, and I prefer, when I'm making almond butter cups, I prefer to use a brand that's a little bit thicker, so it just stands up a little bit better, and it doesn't get quite so sticky. Typically, in a typical almond butter cup, in my normal recipe, my high carb almond butter cup, I add some vanilla, a little bit of sea salt, but then I also add tapioca flour to help make it more of a doughy consistency or a stickier consistency. But with this recipe, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to add some collagen peptides. So this is just 2 tablespoons of a collagen peptide. I use a marine peptide, but you can definitely use just any kind of peptide that you have. This adds some collagen, and it boosts the protein of the almond butter cup, and it makes it helps it bind a little bit. So that's the 2 tablespoons of that. And then the other thing that I add is I add MCT powder, or MCT oil powder, and the kind that I use is also flavored. I'm using a vanilla MCT powder oil, and so this boosts the fat, and it also gives the almond butter filling a little bit of sweetness, and it's stevia sweetened, so there's no carb impact. So we're just going to add those in there and then kind of mix it up. And as it starts mixing, it will soften as the powders start kind of combining with the almond butter. And I just kind of keep mixing that together, and it'll form kind of a softer dough. And once it kind of starts incorporating, sometimes I'll use my hands to kind of knead it a little bit, and that's what I'm going to do here, just to make it a little bit easier. And we just want to get that all incorporated and mix through. All right, it's pretty well mixed. And you can see it's kind of a doughy consistency. So the MCT powder, the MCT oil powder, and the peptides kind of act in the same way as what the tapioca flour would typically do. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in the fridge so that it can get a little bit more solid. It'll make it easier to divide for the almond butter cup. So I'm just going to stick this in the fridge for a minute. And the next step in the almond butter cups is to melt my chocolate for the actual candy. The other thing that I have here is I have just candy molds, and I have them in bite-sized portions, kind of a single thing, and then but there's also, like, you can use ice cube trays, you can use little mini muffins, you can do a regular size muffin and make a muffin tray and make bigger almond butter cups, so really it's up to you. The macros that I'll give at the end will be per candy based on mine, and then I'll also give you the complete macros for all the ingredients, so that if you do make this on your own, you just need to take the whole macro list and then divide it by however many candies you happen to make with your recipe. What I'm going to use for the chocolate chips, I'm going to use, I like dark chocolate, so I'm going to do dark. Now the key to making a almond butter cup keto friendly is in the chocolate you're going to pick. So instead of using just the traditional chocolate chips, I am using the Lily's brand of chocolate. This is no sugar added chocolate. It's stevia sweetened, so there's no carb impact, and this will help make this a keto recipe. So I'm gonna take the chocolate chips and I'm gonna put them in my double boiler. So I have a pan, and you don't need to have a specific double boiler. I have a pan that's over some heat, and I'm just gonna melt this chocolate. Okay, so I'm just gonna pour this whole bag in. If you're concerned about how to measure it out, you can do half at a time, and but I'm pretty comfortable. So I'm just gonna pour the whole bag in and start melting the chocolate chips. The other thing that I'm gonna add to this, again to bump up the fat, is I am gonna add some raw cocoa butter, cacao butter. This is pure fat, and it has a kind of a white chocolate smell to it. So I just add this to the chocolate. It doesn't alter the taste of the chocolate, but it does help the fat content, and then it also does help with the texture of the finished product, I have found. So I'm adding a 1/4 cup or 4 tablespoons of raw cacao butter to the chocolate. And that's another, again, that's to bump up the fat. When you're melting chocolate, the other technique that you can do is you can just put it in a bowl, stick it in the microwave, microwave it for about 30 seconds, bring it out, stir it a little bit, and keep doing that until it's completely melted. You don't want to go in the microwave for a long period of time and look at it and think, oh, they're not melting because they're still staying chocolate chip. You do want to do that 30 seconds at a time. Otherwise, you have the problem of possibly burning the chocolate, and you don't want to have burned chocolate. It's one of the worst smells in the culinary world. You also want to, if you are adding the cacao butter, you want to make sure that you are stirring and incorporating it fully through the chocolate chips. All right, we'll leave that set for a second. And if you haven't already and you are using the candy things, you want to make sure you put them on a cookie sheet now, so that it's easier once you've started filling them. So now we have the melted chocolate, and we are going to start filling our candy molds. And I'm just going to use a teaspoon. It doesn't have to be measured perfectly, but you don't want to overdo it because you have to have enough room in the candy molds for the chocolate, for your almond butter mixture, and then for another layer of chocolate. So just be mindful of that when you do your first fill with the candy mold. So I try to keep it pretty, just a little tiny bit, pretty much just enough to kind of coat the inside of the candy mold. So just a little bit in each one. I like to try to put enough in so that the almond butter mixture is completely encapsulated by the chocolate, but sometimes the almond butter shows through the final product, and it's perfectly fine. It's just my little perfectionist tendencies that get in the way with that one. But you know, you don't have to move at lightning speed, but you do want to move kind of quickly because you don't want the chocolate to start becoming too solid or moving towards room temperature too quickly. And I'll explain why in just a second. And I ordered these candy molds just on Amazon. They had all different kind of shapes and sizes, and they're really inexpensive, super easy. But I did see at the grocery store, you know, they have ice cube trays now that come in all different shapes as well. And I haven't used them, but I would think that they would work perfectly well too if you want to have smaller size bites. You know, when you're talking about having a fat bomb in your diet, you know, you don't want to have this huge thing. This is just a little bit of extra fat to as a snack or something to kind of tide you over. So you want to be mindful of that too, that you know, you don't want to overdo it on the calories. So I'm actually going to set this back on the stove so that it's still over the warm water and stays liquid. And then with each one of these, what I'll do is kind of shake it around a little bit so that the chocolate definitely coats the entire bottom of the candy mold, but then also partially up the sides as well. You want it to cover the bottom, up the sides. It just depends on how OCD you are. For me, it just depends on the day. And I just kind of shake it around so that most of them are getting fully coated. And then the last one. Once you're happy with how that is, then you can, you want to stick this tray in the freezer so that this part gets solid, and then you can start working with your almond butter. So I'm going to put this in the freezer. I'm going to take out my almond butter mixture, and we're going to start working with it. So it's cooled off just a little bit, and what I like to do is I'll just roll it out into a log. I have so for mine, I have 3 different sets of 15, so I have 45 candies, and so I'll try to make enough. I will just portion it out, so. So this is for each one. And so try to figure out about 15 of these. I'm gonna cut this off again. 7. And I just keep kind of cutting them in half until I have the number that I want. Some people I know, you know, you can measure the entire amount and then measure it that way. You know, just whatever's the easiest for eyeballing. So I have all my little pieces of almond butter. Forgot to mention that I just use my countertop. I make sure that it's sanitized, and then it's just easier for me to use a cutting board. But obviously, if you don't have a countertop that works for, then you would just do this all on a cutting board. So I have all my pieces. I try not to handle them too much because I want them not to get too warm before I start putting them into the molds. But now I'm gonna pull out my chocolate. Okay, so now we're ready to start filling our cups. We have the first layer of chocolate that is started to harden. Now we're gonna add the almond butter. So I just take a chunk and I just plop it in and kind of try to push it around. I do try to keep as best I can it from getting completely smushed around the edges, but that is just a personal preference. Again, I just like for the chocolate to cover the whole thing. So, but if you want to have kind of a, you know, you want to be able to see the almond butter coming through, then you can flatten it in there as much as you want. I also, you do want to make sure that the almond butter does, that it's not poking up through the top of the candy mold though. You do want to push it down just slightly and make sure it's completely underneath, so that when you do add the second layer of chocolate, it is, it will cover. So just pop all these in. Okay, now all the almond butter is in the mold, so now we're gonna add our next layer of chocolate. And we'll just start filling the molds. And this is where I tend to get a little messy, but just want to make sure that the cups are filled. Okay, so we kind of have them filled. It's a little messy. So the one other trick that I'll do sometimes is I'll take my bench scraper and I will start at one end of the mold and just kind of scrape it along. Any extra chocolate will go into the next mold, and it'll kind of push the chocolate into the molds a little bit as well. And then you can also see which molds might need more chocolate at the end. Okay, so this goes back in the freezer. And we'll let those sit for just about 10 or 15 minutes and then they'll be ready to go. Okay, we're ready for the final show. They were in the freezer just for about 10-15 minutes. It doesn't take long. We'll find a little bowl for them. And then this is pretty much the easiest part. I'm sure you can even figure this one out on your own. But you just take them and you pop them right out. And you have your little candies. I keep mine in the freezer at all times. If you don't want to do that, I would at least recommend keeping them in the refrigerator. Oops, one of them didn't. So this is something, here's something good for you to see. This is something that can happen. I didn't put enough chocolate in the thing for the first, I'm gonna have it anyway, in the first part of it. So it doesn't ruin it, it just doesn't make it quite as pretty. So anyway, following this, once I'm done with this, I won't bore you with this whole thing, but stay tuned, don't leave yet. I'm gonna show you the macro breakdown for these candies. I made 45 with the ingredients. You may make more or less depending on the size of the mold you use or the amount that you fill it. So the macros that I'm figuring out for you are for the entire batch. When you make them yourself, all you need to do is take that number and divide by the number of candies that you are able to make, and that will give you your per candy macro count, and then you can use that to decide, you know, what a serving would be for you if you are somebody that counts macros. If you're not counting macros, it really doesn't matter. If you just want this for a fat bomb because you're doing a ketogenic diet or you're trying to do a lower carb eating plan, you're fasting, whatever the reason, but you're not counting macros, that's fine too. In the next part, I'll show you the percentage of macros that each one of these contains, and that's just so that you know, typically you want to stay below a certain, you know, if you want to stay below a certain percentage of each of your macros, it'll show you what the percentage is for each one of these two so that you can feel comfortable with your treat and making sure that it fits into your nutritional plan. Now, one of the reasons why you may have chosen to make this recipe, or the reason you were interested in this recipe, is because you are either following a ketogenic diet, or you're trying to go more low carb, or you just want to find something that will help give you a little bit of a treat and make you not crave sugar or overeating. So what I did is I did calculate the macros for these almond butter cups, and I did macros for both the traditional and also for the keto that we just made. So I want to show this to you. So you can see for the macro count what you're looking at, and this, I did this for the entire batch because you guys are all probably going to make different amounts than what I made for your recipe. So all you need to do is, with these numbers, is divide these numbers by the number of candies that you actually are able to make, and that will tell you how many macros per candy that you have. So for this recipe, because we traded out some of the higher carb things for lower carb or keto, we came up with, for an entire batch, it's 41 net grams, net carbs, 216 grams of fat, and 51 grams of protein. And that is 7% carbs, 84% fat and 9% protein. So this would definitely be considered a fat bomb, a really good source of a fat bomb. Now for the traditional, I also figured that out. And if you see the macros, in a typical almond butter cup with traditional ingredients, it's 193 grams of carbs, which is 31% versus the 7% of the macro of the keto. 171 grams of fat, which is 62% of the total amount, and then 43 grams of protein, which equates to 7%. So by making some of the switches that we made, we were able to boost the fat, lower the carbs, protein stayed about the same. But when you're looking for a treat or a fat bomb, you don't need to worry about focusing on the protein. I added collagen because I just like, it's an easy way to add a little bit of collagen to something. Some people don't like collagen peptides, and this is a way to sneak them in. And I personally try to get a good amount of collagen peptides into my own personal diet. So anyway, that's the macro breakdown. Please feel free to contact me if you have questions about that, or you need to figure out how to tweak it a little bit for your own recipe. But if you do make this, I'd love to hear how it turns out for you, and share it with the group. Talk to you later. Bye.